capital improvement process. This dovetails really nicely with the presentation right before here. And I'm going to kind of walk through a little bit more on from the department side about how we kind of manage process from long-range planning through to actually funding projects. So birth of a transportation idea starts at the planning level, long-range planning. These can include CTPs, MTPs, corridor plans, local plans. And really the idea is to kind of envision what's going to happen in the future and where your transportation needs are going to be. This involves a lot of analysis of existing data and projections with modeling and that sort of thing into the future. So we've got, locations of actual project recommendations and alternatives, as well as kind of a write-up about the need, the purpose of the project, and what the plan is for the project. And so this is all kind of put together over multiple modes usually and adopted as a plan by the local governments, local agencies. So the idea is then we take recommendation and decide we want to submit it into the prioritization process. That is our data-driven scoring process for funding projects. This is basically the execution of the STI law that was passed back in 2013 that kind of legally binds the funding of projects to high-scoring projects. So we have to score the higher, or we have to fund the higher scoring projects first in order. And so this process, I'm going to walk through this. We're currently starting this for P6.0 right now, the work group. So the work group kind of defines how we measure each of the criteria and what criteria that is for non-highway mode projects. Once that's approved, we open for project submittal. That's where our planning partners, MPOs, RPOs, and then our division folks submit projects into Spot Online, which we'll see in a minute. And then we go through an extensive data review and scoring process. So this is where we do a lot of QC review, make sure the data points are correct for each of the projects. And then at that point, we program the statewide projects, release those scores, and then open it back up to the locals for their local input point assignments. That augments the scores for both the regional and the division level projects. And the same process kind of happens for both of those categories, at which point in time we release the draft STIP. That process just happened back beginning of January, and then we're looking for approval from the board of the STIP in June. So to support this process, we currently use an application called Spot Online. This was originally developed at P3.0, the third iteration of prioritization back in 2013, 2014. And it allows for entry of projects by the users. It collects the location of the project and project details. And there's a lot of geoprocessing that goes on for the scoring of the projects, particularly for highway and bike ped modes. This is all of our, all the geospatial data that's on our LRS that goes into the scoring of projects for highway. And then the rest of the process looks something like this. I didn't put this up here because I thought you would retain it. It's more that what I just showed basically is just this green box right here. The rest of that is done outside in a very manual process, and it gets very disconnected and involves a lot of different business units, a lot of different users. So we collect all that data back in to a scoring spreadsheet, and this is where we actually produce the final scores for the project. We are now on column IO in this for the highway, and that's just in one tab. We've got probably about 12 tabs on this thing. It's getting a little unwieldy. We have formulas in here that look like that. That's really fun to make sure that everything's accurate on. And so once that's all done, as part of this iterative process we just walked through, those projects that are funded get programmed. And so programming is just matching the budget to projects to be scheduled. So this happens using Excel, Access, and ArcMap, Roads and Highways, Esri products to support that. This is basically the results from prioritization we fund projects as they are ranked in order. Of course, there are always exceptions, like this one here winds up getting combined, so whenever the results are released, you don't see that one being funded. It was just scooped up into another project, and so we're going down that list till we run out of money. So here's our budget for all the years throughout the STIPS window, so for a 10-year program. And that's further complicated by the regional and division calculations where we're distributing money in various ways throughout the state. And then once a project actually gets programmed, it's maintained in a series of access databases on our file server. So all of this is kind of disparate, no real connections between everything. It's all kind of manually organized right now. The mapping of it also is sort of in two different locations. We've got new location projects we maintain in a desktop application on our file server. And then we've got existing location highway projects which we map to the LRS. And that happens to reside on an SD SQL Server based database. And so this looks like a nice straightforward linear process, but what also is going on is you've got regular updates from time to time of the planning documents. You also have ongoing revisions, monthly amendments that happen to the program. And then for the new prioritization cycle, you've got certain projects that are not considered committed, so we have to put those back through prioritization. And then we want to always be making sure that we're looking to the most recent planning documents and updating any information we need to back into the STIP and back into our prioritization scoring process. So we thought it was time to look for some other way to manage all of this process. So that's when we had an idea that we might ought to develop some sort of framework for what we wanted this system to look like. So essentially, TOPS is, of course, we have an acronym: Transportation Online Planning, Prioritization, and Programming System. And so this is essentially the central data repository for all of our projects, and that's how we envisioned it, to include STIP projects to support our prioritization process. So basically taking what Spot Online currently does and rebuilding it, bigger, better, faster, all of that. Long-range plans, we also want to tie into the CTP process and ultimately, hopefully trying to integrate with all the MPOs for their MTPs as well to be able to make sure that we can, as Caitlin was mentioning, try and look back, see where that project started at the beginning of its life cycle all the way through as they're doing project development and actually implementing the project. So in addition to that, we ultimately want to have kind of the division-led projects, smaller maintenance projects potentially, all going towards supporting a need for executive-level dashboarding and really an overall picture of what's going on throughout the state in terms of transportation improvement. And so we knew we were going to need to develop this in different modules and also reach out and actually make these connections to make this whole process work. So this was kind of our dream. So we've got the three modules. Is this going to work or not? Yeah, so long-range planning, prioritization, and programming up here, all connected, talking to each other, and reaching out and actually utilizing our existing authoritative sources. So whether that's data from SAP on schedules or roads and highways to get source data for scoring, and also for certain programming operations, looking at T's for safety data. We've got a cost estimation tool. Prioritization scoring is currently kind of a separate set of services that we can hit. So this was kind of our idea that we then put forth for proposals and hope to get somebody on board to start building this thing. So with that, We actually did, so that's JMT, and these guys are here with us to kind of walk through some of the process and where we're at so far. So we've done a lot of work trying to define all of our requirements and to help the team kind of understand what the needs are, and also to help us understand what we think we can accomplish, or if we can do things differently and that sort of thing. So, yeah.
Thank you. Can you hear me talk like this?
I hear.
I don't know if I start to dip down and talk really quickly.
So they're recording.
Oh, I have to. Sorry. Take two. Okay. Can you hear me now? So, thank you, Austin. Like you said, I'm James. I am a project manager at JMT. On this project, I am one of the deputy project managers. My focus is more on kind of the product, developing the application, the day-to-day kind of developer and design piece. So I get to sit and listen to Austin and his team and a couple other people who I will respect their anonymity, throw out ideas and talk about how they think the app could work, how they currently do the work they're trying to do, and our team just tries to figure out how to fit that, what they do and what they want to do, into as simple an architecture as we can manage, just, in large part just for usability. And a large part of that process is the wireframe reviews, mock-ups. We'll go through, is this kind of what you're talking about? Everybody who's been through this process knows that that's just a regular feature nowadays. You just take a look at how you think things are gonna look, and then you keep working. We started off at the beginning a few months ago with a very basic design. It looks good. It looks better on a computer screen. But over the course of a few months, we got to a point where there's just more color, more visibility that just increases the usability. Your eye can travel to the data you want to see. You can more easily distinguish what you're looking for. The specifics of this, I won't go into right at this moment, just because you've heard the overview from Austin. You've heard about what they do. But when we go through just adding more of the programming process to get a lot of the STIP development and analysis of the different information they're looking at. So they're not looking at tab IO, which is 9 times 26. That's a lot of tabs. Instead, trying to get it all on one web page so that you can look at it at your desk in one place, all aggregated together, the way people are becoming more and more accustomed to looking at things through a web interface. Just another example of how we started off with the early thinking was that in putting a new project into the TOPS application, we would start with more of a modal style, so you could see that you were doing something separate, and then you would step through some workflow. It turned out over a few iterations that just didn't work. And you can see here, Austin was talking about, and he showed you some of the images of where they have the text and some of the maps for each project. Over the course of a few weeks, we get to the point where we can break it out. We just use the whole web page. You can actually walk through project creation, and see at every step. You see little check marks beside that give you progress indicators without having to reduce your screen real estate in a modal, that sort of thing. Preserving the text entry that you want, in addition to having some mapping components that we'll get to in a second, until you end up just being able to edit different parts of different projects in the STIP. Austin mentioned that, did you mention? I don't know if you mentioned, but we're developing the application backwards. So we're starting with programming and then stepping our way back through, and in part because of some of the needs of the department and how they wanted, what they wanted and needed to be able to use first. So you'll see some white space and some menu options and stuff at the top that aren't filled in, that we're just leaving space for more information that will come later. But as you see here, this is kind of an example of the modal project creation that we've actually migrated to a full page for. you can see we built in some of the mapping functionality, so they're not having to do things in 3 different places. You can see there on the left, I'll get my hand out of the way, you can select a different base map. Right now we've got the, in the previous screen you saw there's more of a streets view. Here you've got more of the satellite imagery. That overlay that you see, if you see that purple, is I think MPO and RPO regions, but people wanted to be able to select different options for the layers that they're looking at there. So we had an ability to vary which ones of those you can see depending on which kind of project you're creating or administering, even changing the transparency. But not everyone wants to pan and zoom to a map. Everyone who's used Google Maps knows you don't always pan and zoom on your phone to find a place. Sometimes you just type in where you're going. So over here on the right, you can see the location finder. You can search by county. We've also built in the functionality to search by division and region, just other ways for people to quickly get to where they want to be. And then we're about halfway through the programming module, which is standing up the projects and being able to start divvying out money, and then you get to the rest of it. So what you're seeing here is building up the project funding and being able to actually start putting money where it needs to go so that Austin and his team can do their job, do their work without having to have a lot of their work being taking care of these applications. Instead, just letting the application take care of the data so they can take care of the state transportation infrastructure.
So I guess, are there any questions? We can kind of step back and talk a little bit more about some of these screens if you want. Some of this was a mixture of wireframes and actual functioning software that we got screenshots from the JMT team for. So, yes, Stacy.
Do you have a tentative completion date?
For the programming module, we're looking at later on between the spring and summer this year is the goal. Yeah. And then followed up or starting work or about the same time on the prioritization module. We'll need to go ahead and try and get working on that to have that completed by the start of the Piece 7.0 cycle. So. No questions? Nobody wants to keep everybody from their break? Very good. Well, thank y'all.